It is with deep reverence and the sharp gaze imposed by the discipline of art history that I delve into the trajectory of Henri Matisse, a master whose relentless pursuit of aesthetic serenity redefined the paradigm of color and form in modernity. What we seek to understand here is not merely the chronology of a painter, but the genesis of a visual thought that culminated in what he himself defined as a dream, an art of balance, purity, and serenity. This statement, uttered in the twilight of his career, is the guiding thread that allows us to rewind and analyze the dialectical path that transformed personal suffering and the uncertainty of the 20th century into a grammar of lucid joy. Matisse, born in 1869 in Le Château-Cambrésis in the cold north of France, was not predestined for the bohemian salons of Paris. His childhood unfolded in Beauharnais-en-Vermandois, a locality deeply tied to the textile industry. It is crucial to note this environment, a world of threads, dyes, and lights, where discipline, routine, and family commerce were the norm, and art was an absence, not a destiny. The young Henri, inclined toward law, saw his future mapped out in codes and procedures, and his father certainly preferred a lawyer in the family. Art, therefore, burst into his life like an accident. This accident occurred in 1890, when, at 21 years old, Matisse was convalescing after an operation. His mother, in a gesture that art history would immortalize, placed a box of paints in his hands. What followed was an epiphany, described by the artist himself as the discovery of paradise. This translation of pigment into sensory experience meant the immediate abandonment of his legal career and the beginning of real life. From then on, the phase of necessary obedience and methodical absorption began. He moved to Paris, entering the academic orbit, first at the Académie Julian and subsequently at the École des Beaux-Arts, under the tutelage of Gustave Moreau. The early years were marked by rigorous study, copies in the Louvre, mastery of drawing, perspective, and anatomy. However, the art historian must discern that this period was not one of blind conformity. Matisse obeyed the rules while methodically noting how he would disobey them. It is the paradox of the avant-garde. Rupture is only meaningful when one deeply knows the structure one intends to dismantle. Gustave Moreau, a visionary, perceived the young man's disruptive potential and encouraged him, propelling him toward freedom, synthesis, color as idea, and not as makeup. Under this blessing, Matisse devoured influences without clinging to any. The austere and ordering sobriety of Chardin, the color and ebullition of Delacroix, the absorbing atmosphere of Turner that swallows form, and the fleeting light of the Impressionists were all assimilated. But the structural influence, the pillar on which Matisse would build his chromatic edifice, was Paul Cézanne. From Cézanne, the master who transformed painting into architecture, not mirage, Matisse inherited the conviction that art is not mimesis, but construction. The canvas ceases to be a window to the world and becomes an autonomous surface, an object structured by the artist. In 1899, Matisse purchased Cézanne's work, Three Bathers, from the dealer Ambroise Vollard, an acquisition he would value throughout his life, later donating it to the city of Paris with specific instructions for its preservation. In a phase of technical experimentation, Matisse also ventured to the Côte d'Azur, working with Signac and Cross in Saint-Tropez, absorbing the lessons of divisionism, the exercise with scientific light, and the division of nature into dots and patches was undeniably useful and ingenious. However, the artist felt a lack of air. He sought blows of meaning, not just technical ingenuity. Nature, in its essence, needed to be condensed, not fragmented. This dissatisfaction led him to Collioure in 1905, where he collaborated with André Derain, further refining his approach to color. While aesthetic evolution bubbled, material life imposed resistance. Matisse faced doubts, paternal disapproval, and economic hardships, selling few paintings. His wife, Amélie, was a crucial force, sustaining the home and studio, even when he was ridiculed as the painter of rare colors. This tension between material misery and spiritual ambition is the matrix from which the great mutation would be born. Between 1904 and 1905, Matisse's aesthetic laboratory reached the boiling point. An intimate revolution occurred. Pigment ceased to be a mere descriptive vehicle and began to build the work, to construct. It was no longer the representation of the painted thing, but the visible emotion itself. The map of modern art was about to be set ablaze. The catalyst for this eruption was the Salon d'Automne of 1905 in Paris. The scene was one of violent juxtaposition. In the center of the room, classical busts by Donatello coexisted with canvases that seemed like true fires. The critics' reaction was immediate, visceral, and, as often happens in the history of the avant-garde, gave the movement its name. The critic Louis Vaucel, upon encountering such chromatic dissonance, uttered the lapidary phrase, Donatello among the wild beasts. Matisse, Derain, and Vlaminck gained a war name, Les Fauves, the wild beasts. The press sought insult. The paintings were accused of being chromatic barbarism, seeming painted by children with gouache. However, the force of the noise could not drown out the historical fact. Matisse had just opened a door that would never close again. At the epicenter of this aesthetic earthquake was La Femme au Chapeau, Woman with a Hat, a portrait of his wife Amélie. The colors were used without mimetic reference, greens that do not exist in human skin, reds absent from any face, blues that addressed the retina directly, ignoring the sky. Verisimilitude was irrelevant. What mattered was the impact, what the work provoked. Matisse was not representing the woman. He was reinventing her. Fauvism, though brief in its existence as a formal movement, lasting only a few years, was the affirmation of a creed. If Impressionism, a previous generation, had freed light from shadows, Fauvism freed pigment from subjection to objective reality. From 1905 onward, red could convey calm, blue could be the materialization of a wound, and green, a presence. The palette ceased to obey the object and began to obey emotional truth. This is the fundamental hermeneutic key to understanding Matisse. He was not merely the painter of strident colors. He was the artist who orchestrated and ordered the picture through color. His methodology was synthesis. Simplify form so that pigment could think. Remove theatrical perspective. Erase anecdote and clean the space. The result of this laborious distillation always seemed easy, for his artistic ethic dictated that the effort should not be noticeable. Behind the serenity he promised in his 1908 manifesto, there were thousands of invisible aesthetic decisions. It is also in this period of consolidation that the productive tension with Pablo Picasso is defined. It is a historical mistake to simplify the relationship as mere competition over who would be more destructive. The rivalry between them was creative, marking the entire 20th century, establishing a dialogue between the clear line of hue and Picasso's Cubist rupture. While Picasso through Cubism would cut and recombine form, Matisse would opt for the path of distillation. Each year he sought fewer lines, more meaning, less resemblance, and more presence. The thesis was brutal, color as structure. The practice was equally brutal, synthesis. Fauvism was the fire. What followed was the search for harmony and plenitude. In 1917, amid the carnage of the Great War in Europe, Matisse made a decision that, though it seemed like an escape, was a bold aesthetic challenge: to leave the Paris of avant-gardes, saturated with theories, and move to Nice. Initially, it might sound like a bourgeois refuge under the sun of the Côte d'Azur. In reality, it was a bet, the search for a truth in Mediterranean light that Parisian theoretical effervescence could no longer offer him. His studio in Nice transformed into a chromatic laboratory. It was filled with curtains, oriental fabrics, flowers, jars, and reclining women. However, it was not a mere exotic setting, but a device to capture and translate the light of the South. Mediterranean light imposed a reinvention of his language. No longer the incendiary Fauvism, nor the dramatic chiaroscuro, but transparency and atmospheric vibration. The works from this period, such as Interior from 1920 or Interior with Violin from 1918 to 1919, seem like scenes suspended in a time averse to war. He painted silent interiors, women by open windows that did not delimit inside and outside, and fruits that seemed to float in luminous penumbra. Many critics accused him of having domesticated himself, of producing merely decorative canvases. Matisse, however, defended a superior logic. His purpose was to offer repose amid barbarism. His famous phrase on the subject is the neuralgic point of this phase. I dream of an art of balance, of purity and serenity, something like a good armchair that relieves man of physical fatigue. In Nice, he began a systematic exploration of the female body as pure plastic form. The odalisques that appear in his canvases should not be read as simple erotic fantasies. They are essentially color experiments. Each patterned fabric, each cushion and curtain served as an essay on how color, by itself, could model volumes and define space without dependence on line. Matisse's prestige, meanwhile, transcended French borders, with exhibitions in Berlin, New York, and Moscow. In 1930, a trip to Tahiti represented a milestone of radical simplification. The oceanic light, more diffuse and enveloping than the Mediterranean, revealed to him that color had the capacity not only to represent, but to truly inhabit space. During this trip, Matisse did not paint directly, but produced drawings and notes that would influence later works, capturing the essence of Polynesia in abstract forms and vibrant colors. Upon returning to France, this finding translated into the dissolution of figures into planes of pure color. The black line, previously used to outline, now transformed into a melody that contours color, an ocean that occupies it all. While the 1930s saw Europe precipitating toward fascism, Matisse remained on French soil, offering a different form of resistance. Although he did not paint explicit political manifestos like his rival Picasso, works like La Danse, Barnes' version, 1932-1933, insisted on joy at the edge of the abyss, representing bodies in motion as a choreography of life. The artist who began copying plasters in rigid academies, who set Paris ablaze with fauvism, and who sought refuge in the light of Nice, was now at a point of inflection. His language continued to evolve, but the greatest proof of invention and, paradoxically, the consolidation of his philosophy of serenity was reserved for his final years. In 1941, at 72 years old, Matisse received a somber diagnosis: duodenal cancer. He survived a high-risk operation, but remained physically limited, often confined to a wheelchair or bed. For a painter accustomed to working standing on large formats, this was almost a mutilation. However, from this extreme fragility was born his ultimate rebirth, what he himself would call a second life. This second life found expression in an unexpected and radically modern medium: the papiers découpés, or cutouts of paper painted with gouache, which he composed into monumental murals. What at first glance might be dismissed as childish craft or the amusement of an invalid became a fundamental aesthetic language. With scissors in hand, Matisse drew in the air, cutting forms that encapsulated line and color simultaneously. The brush became unnecessary. Pigment was now direct matter. He captured the essence of this technique with irony and precision. "I draw with scissors." The cutouts were not a decorative whim, they were a vital manifesto. In works like La Tristesse du Roi, 1952, or Polynésie, Le Ciel, 1946, the figures float and dance in a space of pure color, freed from gravity. It was as if, deprived of his physical strength, Matisse had found a way to paint life itself without bearing the weight of the body. The lightness he had dreamed of throughout his career finally materialized. The spiritual and aesthetic culmination of this cutout phase was the Chapel of the Rosary in Vence, erected between 1947 and 1951. Conceived in collaboration with the Dominican nuns, the work went far beyond stained glass or murals. Matisse designed the integral layout, from the ornaments to the nuns' habits. In the chapel, light is not a decorative accessory, it is the transformative force. The stained glass windows, dominated by blues, greens, and yellows, convert the architectural space into a habitable painting, a canvas in which the spectator is invited to enter with the entire body. The artist, who had spent his life seeking refuge in art, finally found it in a concrete temple. The criticism that had once labeled him a hedonist recognized in this work the spiritual testament of a master. Matisse made color a secular religion. His rival and friend Picasso, in private confessions, expressed deep admiration for Matisse's work, acknowledging his mastery of color, though without recording specific phrases about blindness after his death. In his final years, the studio in Nice transformed into a sanctuary of light and paper. Monumental cutouts hung on the walls, like windows eternally open to the sea. Friends and disciples who visited him left with the certainty that they had not found a resigned invalid, but a master who transmuted fragility into invention. Matisse's biography closes not in defeat, but in expansion. The body faded, but the art reached a cosmic scale. Henri Matisse passed away in 1954 at 84 years old in Nice. The news, devoid of clamor, passed like the inevitable and silent sunset. The legacy he left us is more than a collection of isolated works. It is a complete language. From the incendiary fauves to the paper cutouts, Matisse proved that color is not an accessory, but the essence itself. He demonstrated that art does not need to narrate tragedy to achieve depth, and that beauty, when distilled with honesty, can be subversive. His impact is not measured only by museum spaces, but by how he altered our everyday perception. A table with fruits, an open window, a fragment of cut paper, all can convert into complete universes when seen through a Matissian gaze. He dreamed of an art that would bring rest to the fatigued body. He fulfilled that promise, but gave us something beyond repose, a form of luminous and serene resistance against the darkness of the 20th century. Each observation, each new glance that opens thanks to his work, is an extension of the light he left burning. To deepen this understanding, it is essential to explore in greater detail the historical contexts and influences that shaped the young Matisse in his initial formation. Late 19th century France was a cauldron of social and cultural changes. The Third Republic, established after the defeat in the Franco-Prussian War of 1870, promoted secular and republican values, but the industrialized North, where Matisse grew up, was marked by the rigidity of textile work. The Matisse family owned a seed and grain store, but the textile environment of Bohun-en-Vermandois, with its factories of colored fabrics, planted subliminal seeds in his chromatic sensitivity. The repetitive patterns of fabrics, the mixtures of dyed threads, and the light filtered through workshop windows can be seen as unconscious preludes to his later obsession with color as a structural element. When Matisse abandoned law in 1890, after that epiphany with the box of paints, he not only changed careers, he redefined his existence. His initial studies in Saint-Quentin, under local teachers, were timid but decisive steps. Upon arriving in Paris in 1891, the city was the epicenter of world art, with Impressionism still reverberating and symbolism gaining strength. The Académie Julian, founded by Rodolphe Julian, was known for its more liberal approach compared to the rigid École des Beaux-Arts, allowing students like Matisse to experiment beyond classical canons. Gustave Moreau, who took on Matisse's tutelage at the École des Beaux-Arts in 1895, was a pivotal figure. Moreau, a symbolist painter with works like The Apparition, 1876, emphasized imagination and color as vehicles for the spiritual. He encouraged his students to copy ancient masters in the Louvre, but with a critical eye, fostering innovation. Matisse would later recall how Moreau freed him to explore color not as decoration, but as essence. During this period, Matisse produced works like The Dinner Table, 1897, still influenced by academicism, but already showing touches of vibrant color that foreshadowed fauvism. The influences assimilated by Matisse were vast and eclectic. Jean-Baptiste Siméon Chardin, with his serene still lifes like The Ray, 1728, taught him order and balanced composition. Eugène Delacroix, the romantic master of dynamic color and liberty leading the people, 1830, inspired emotion through pigment. J.M.W. Turner, the visionary British artist of Rain, Steam, and Speed, 1844, showed how light and atmosphere could dissolve forms, a lesson Matisse would carry forward. The Impressionists, like Claude Monet with his Cathedral series, freed light, but Matisse saw them as a starting point, not an end. Paul Cézanne, however, was the definitive catalyst. Works like Mont Sainte-Victoire, 1904-1906, demonstrated how color could build volumes in space, treating the canvas as an architectural construction. Matisse visited Cézanne's studio and absorbed the idea that painting should be a harmony parallel to nature, not an imitation. This influence manifested in Matisse's early works like Luxe, Calme et Volupté, 1904, where color begins to assert itself as independent. In this painting, exhibited at the Salon des Indépendants in 1905, Matisse combines divisionist elements with a composition inspired by Baudelaire, creating an idyllic scene of nudity and landscape that announces fauvism. The experimentation with divisionism, or pointillism, came during stays in Saint-Tropez and Collioure, alongside Paul Signac and Henri Edmond Cross. Signac, author of From Eugène Delacroix to Neo-Impressionism, 1899, advocated the scientific decomposition of color into pure dots. Matisse experimented with this in Woman with a Hat, 1905, but soon abandoned the method, finding it too mechanical. He sought an emotional synthesis, not an analytical fragmentation. This transition marked the birth of Fauvism, where color becomes expressive and autonomous. Matisse's personal life during these years was marked by challenges. Married to Amélie Pereire in 1898, the couple faced financial difficulties. Amélie worked as a milliner to support the family, which included 3 children. Marguerite, Matisse's biological daughter from a previous relationship with Caroline Joblot, adopted and raised by Amélie, Jean, and Pierre. Matisse's father's disapproval, as a practical merchant, added pressure. Despite this, Amélie was not only a supporter but a muse, appearing in works like The Conversation, 1908-1912, where the dialogue between forms and colors reflects their partnership. Marguerite in particular posed for numerous portraits, such as Marguerite, 1906-1907, capturing her youth with simplified features and bold colors, and later became a key figure in preserving her father's legacy. The Salon d'Automne of 1905 was the apex of the Fauvist revolution. In addition to Woman with a Hat, Matisse exhibited Open Window, Couleur, 1905, with intense blues and flaming reds that challenged traditional representation. André Derain and Maurice de Vlaminck, companions in the movement, contributed similar works. The term fauve, wild beasts, came from Vaucel's criticism, but Matisse embraced it as an emblem of freedom. The movement, though short-lived, influenced German expressionism and modernism in general, paving the way for later abstractions. Analyzing Woman with a Hat in detail, the work portrays Amélie with stylized features, the face in bands of green, yellow, and pink. The hat, an explosion of multicolored plumes. There is no realistic shading. Color models the volume. Sold to Leo and Gertrude Stein, the painting became an icon, symbolizing the break with mimesis. Critics like Camille Mauclair called it a monstrosity, but visionary collectors like the Steins recognized its value, becoming important patrons of Matisse. Matisse's manifesto in Notes of a Painter, 1908, articulated his philosophy. Expression comes from color and simplified form, aiming for balance and serenity. He rejected the anecdotal, focusing on the essential. This is seen in The Joy of Life, 1905-1906, a large panel with nude figures in an Arcadian landscape, where curves and colors create musical rhythm. Inspired by Baudelaire and symbolist poetry, Matisse saw art as sensory harmony. The circular composition of the figures evokes dance and unity, contrasting with the cubist fragmentation that would soon follow. The relationship with Picasso, initiated in 1906 at Gertrude Stein's salon, was a rich dialogue. Picasso, younger, admired Matisse but competed, while Picasso's Les Demoiselles d'Avignon, 1907, fragmented form, Matisse responded with synthesis in Blue Nude, 1907, where the body is reduced to black contours on a colored background. This rivalry propelled both. Matisse explored African sculptures for simplification, influencing primitivism. Works like Harmony in Red, 1908, show interiors where color dominates, with decorative patterns that fuse figure and ground, anticipating abstractions. After Fauvism, Matisse traveled to Germany, Spain, and Morocco, 1912-1913, absorbing Islamic and Oriental art. In Tangier, he painted Window at Tangier, 1912, where decorative patterns and intense lights fuse interior and exterior. These trips enriched his palette with deep blues and arabesque ornaments, seen in The Moroccans, 1916, an abstract composition of figures and geometric forms reflecting non-Western influences. The move to Nice in 1917 was strategic. Escaping the war, Matisse found in the Riviera a mild climate and constant light. His hotel studio at the Regina Hotel became a creative refuge. Works like Interior at Nice, 1919, show windows open to the sea, symbolizing mental openness. Critics like Roger Fry praised Matisse's decoration, but he saw it as depth, art as spiritual comfort in turbulent times. During the 1920s, he produced series of interiors like The Open Window, Couleur, 1920, where light floods the space, dissolving boundaries between inside and outside. The female body dominated this phase. Models like Henriette Carrère and Laurette posed for Odalisque series, such as Odalisque with Red Trousers, 1921, where patterned fabrics compete with the figure, testing color as a space modeler. Influenced by Persian and Indian art, Matisse collected textiles, using them to create compositions where pattern and color create depth without linear perspective. In Large Interior with Odalisque, 1928, the space is flattened, with decorative elements evoking tapestries, reinforcing his view of art as elevated ornament. International exhibitions solidified his fame. In 1910, the Bernheim-Jeune Gallery in Paris. In 1913, the Armory Show in New York introduced Matisse to the U.S., despite controversies. In 1927, he won the Carnegie Prize. His trip to Tahiti in 1930, following Gauguin's footsteps, was transformative. The equatorial light and corals inspired Tahitian Window, 1935, with saturated colors and simplified forms. Though he did not paint on site, the drawings resulted in works like the Oceania series, where Polynesian motifs fuse with abstraction. In the 1930s, with the rise of Nazism, Matisse remained in France, focusing on large compositions like The Dance for the Barnes Foundation. This 11-meter mural depicts figures dancing in a circle, symbolizing unity and joy amid chaos. Unlike Picasso's Guernica, 1937, Matisse's resistance was subtle, through affirmative beauty. He also explored engravings and illustrations, such as for Mallarmé's Poésies, 1932, where fluid lines complement poetic texts. The illness in 1941 forced a reinvention. After surgery for duodenal cancer, Matisse used assistants to pin cutouts on walls. Techniques like those in Jazz, 1947, an illustrated book with cutouts and poetic texts, explore circus and music themes with organic forms in vivid colors. Icarus, 1947, shows a figure falling in starry blue, symbolizing aspiration despite fragility. Other works like Blue Nude Ivor, 1952, demonstrate evolution, cutout forms in dynamic poses, freed from realistic anatomy. The Chapel of the Rosary was his final opus magnum. Designed for Sister Jacques-Marie, Monique Bourgeois, his former nurse, it includes white tiles with linear drawings of the Stations of the Cross, abstract stained glass, and liturgical vestments. Inaugurated in 1951, the chapel integrates art and architecture, with colored light creating an immersive experience. Matisse saw it as my masterpiece, a synthesis of his life where color transcends the material to the spiritual. In his last years, Matisse remained productive, creating series like The Swimming Pool, 1952, blue cutouts evoking water and movement. His influence extended to artists like Mark Rothko, who adopted pure color fields in paintings like Number 14, 1960, and Ellsworth Kelly, with simplified forms in minimalist sculptures. In post-war American abstract expressionism, like in Willem de Kooning, Matisse's chromatic freedom echoed, though with more aggressive gesturality. Museums like the MoMA, the Centre Pompidou, and the Musée Matisse in Nice house extensive collections, with frequent retrospectives, such as the 1992 one at the MoMA, which highlighted his trajectory. His impact on modern design is evident. From textiles to graphics, Matisseian simplification inspires minimalism and bold color. In art therapy, his cutout techniques are used for emotional expression, especially in illness contexts, echoing his own resilience. Matisse's legacy transcends the visual. He taught that art can heal, offering serenity in a chaotic world. His trajectory, from a fortuitous accident to a chromatic revolution, proves that true innovation arises from persistence and inner vision. In a century marked by wars and uncertainties, Matisse ignited a light of hope through color, inviting us to see the world not as it is, but as it could be, balanced, pure, and serene. To enrich this analysis, let us consider the broader context of European modernism. Matisse emerged in an era of transition, where 19th century positivism gave way to 20th century subjectivism. Influenced by Moreau's symbolism, he rejected photographic realism, prioritizing inner sensation. Compared to Van Gogh, who used color for turbulent emotion, Matisse sought harmony, as in The Red Studio, 1911, where red unifies the space, creating an environment of introspective calm. His Fauvist phase also dialogues with the expressionism of Munch or Kirchner, but without existential anguish. Instead, it offers vital exuberance. Works like Lux II, 1907 to 1908, show nudity in landscapes, evoking lost paradises, influenced by Gauguin, but with more autonomous color. In the 1910s, trips to Morocco introduced Islamic elements, as in Zora on the Terrace, 1912, where geometric patterns and warm colors fuse Orientalism with modernism, anticipating abstraction. In Nice, Matisse refined this synthesis, producing series like The Piano Lesson, 1916, where geometric forms and cool colors create rhythmic tension, reflecting Cubist influences without fragmentation. His linear drawings, as in Themes and Variations, 1941-1943, explore repetition, similar to musical studies, emphasizing creative process. The illness transformed his practice. The cutouts allowed monumental scale, as in The Swimming Pool, 1952, installed at the MoMA, where blues evoke aquatic immersion. This phase influenced pop art, with Warhol adopting colored silhouettes, and minimalism, with Judd valuing color as material. Academically, studies like Hilary Sperling's Matisse the Life, 2005, detail his resilience, while Jack Flam's Matisse on Art, 1995, compiles writings revealing his philosophy. His cultural impact persists. In fashion, with designers like Yves Saint Laurent inspired by odalisques. In cinema, with references in films like The Dreamers, 2003. Matisse did not just paint, he redefined seeing. His art, accessible yet profound, invites participation, making him eternal in art history.